add some stuff. Gonna add this in here. Bam, looks great. All right, so Candyman. Yes, the story of a young up-and-coming artist in a Chicago suburb of Cabrini Green. Candyman is a sequel. It's definitely a sequel reboot, I feel comfortable saying. It's mostly a sequel, but it shares the same name as the original. But it's a sequel to the 1992 film Candyman. I never actually saw that film. Andy did, and I think Nin, you've seen it as well, right?
I've seen it a few times.
All right, so I never have, so I'm coming in real fresh on this. Candyman is the story of Anthony McCoy, young up-and-coming artist in Chicago, living with his girlfriend, Brianna Cartwright, played wonderfully by Tiana Paris. One night, Anthony and Brianna are having Brianna's brother over. He tells him a spooky story about the Candyman, right? A man who was a janitor at a school and used to give candy out to kids. And one day a razor blade was found in one of the pieces of candy. Chicago police found out, went and found the Candyman and beat him down in the most unjust fashion because it turned out it wasn't his fault. The razor blades were coming from somebody else and he was framed. And the Candyman very quickly becomes a kind of a Bloody Mary figure in the community of Cabrini Green at that point. He is like an entity, right? An evil, a horror slasher, I think, in the most traditional sense, but more Bloody Mary rules. You say his name in the mirror 5 times and he appears, a Candyman. Bloody Mary's 3 times. I'd attribute him more to more like a Freddy Krueger than like a Jason Voorhees, right? He's a bit mystical. And the film really dives into exploring what that means. But for Anthony, who hears this story, he gets inspired. He's been looking for something new to dig into with his art. So he travels to Cabrini Green the next morning with a camera to try to take some photos, maybe look at some settings and find some inspiration. He meets some people, he talks to some folks, and he discovers more about this Candyman story. And along the way, the line begins to blur between reality and fiction and what is and is not real. And suddenly our young artist discovers he is far more tangled up in this Candyman tale than maybe he ever intended to be. The film stars Yahya Abdul-Mateen II and Tiana Paris in our leads. It's directed by Nia DaCosta. It is a wonderful horror film. Andy, what do you think of Candyman?
So I'm a huge fan of this property. I think there's a lot of great things, and I think there's some things that don't quite work. I think it might grow on me on kind of multiple viewings because I think there's a little bit of viewing anxiety or just kind of that hype about it. There's definitely, I think its biggest issue is that there's too many ideas fighting for kind of prominence. It's a very kind of different interpretation of what Candyman is, and it's Candyman as like an avenging angel, as like a representation of like Black trauma, as just the slasher that comes because you invoked him, and these ideas are all present in the film, kind of fighting. So I think narratively it's a little all over the place, but it does have a lot of mood. It has a really great score, and it does have some really kind of grisly scenes. It's not super scary, like there aren't a bunch of jump scares, but it's not really that kind of movie.
Nin, initial impressions of Candyman, what'd you think?
So I actually ended up watching it twice, but
oh wow,
it was mostly because there's some woman texting in the corner, and she actually took a phone call during the movie. So I was just like, "You're ruining my horror movie experience."
The worst thing.
But there was, I liked it. I will say that I'm in several horror movie groups, and there was a lot of people that actually were upset about how it's so woke. But it's like, I mean, the first one also covers similar issues, themes where it's just like the original Candyman was a slave that fell in love with a prominent guy's daughter, and they end up murdering him because of that. But as far as what I liked the new one. I will say, I guess there was a lot going on at times, so it felt like it was kind of, I guess, in the first act for a lot of the movie, and then you kind of go into
kind of the end.
Yeah, the end.
Like, yeah.
It felt kind of abrupt, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. So I think, having not seen the original, I actually really like this movie a lot. I think what I like the most about it isn't actually in the writing, it's the cinematography. And we should talk about that at the end, because it's worth talking about. This movie has some stunning directorial work by DaCosta, but the writing is trying to handle a lot. It feels like there's like 3 or 4 films in what this movie is trying to do, and it's a little long. It's like what, 2 hours 20, but
No, it's 90 minutes.
Yeah.
It's really short.
is it really?
Yeah,
Oh my God.
I thought it was much
It
longer, but
needs
yeah,
to
no,
be
it's
2
90.
hours 20. Yeah, like it's doing so much in there, not only trying to cover like the Candyman mythos and the multiple iterations of that over generations, which is kind of talked about in the film, but also trying to juggle like a host of characters in a gentrified city. It's trying to handle art critique. It's trying to handle racism. Like there is a ton of stuff this movie is attempting to do, and I think its biggest downside is that it's trying to hold too much, right? It's a 5-pound pail and 10 gallons of water, or whatever that phrase is. So let's jump into it, right? First things first, the plot. You had both seen the original, so you can kind of help me piece this together. But the first time our artist hears about the Candyman is at this kind of get together, right, with his girlfriend's brother, and he's telling her this kind of goofy story about I don't remember her last name, Helen, is this researcher who was interested in this Candyman story, who ended up going crazy, right? And it's told with this wonderful shadow puppet look kind of thing that you can see in the trailers throughout the film. Really fantastic, very artistic. I didn't know like that kind of story he's telling is the plot of the first film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of like that they did it that way, where
Yeah.
because I would recommend watching the first one and then going back, because they do reference a lot of the first one in the new one, but it's
Mhm.
definitely in the first one the main character is a white woman, which in the second one they only reference her
Yeah.
and the things that she came across. Like she was in our neighborhood and she was taking photos of people and like doing all this research, and then she just went crazy and like
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it just comes out of nowhere. Yeah, it's really strange, and I liked the way the film kind of grows that myth, and then as Anthony kind of goes to investigate the Candyman, conspiracy or whatever it is. Like he finds like there's what she was investigating a previous story, so he goes down that rabbit hole. What was she investigating, and then what was that related to? And you start to find these kind of like generational instances of people who are discovering this idea of a candy man in some capacity, and being felt by it, right? Like people who go nuts or go crazy or get too tangled up in it. It's a little like Nightmare on Elm Street 3 that way, or 2, I guess. The kid who discovers Freddy and starts to learn more about him, and then before he knows it is like, wait, this is too real, this is too much, right? I didn't know I was this far down the rabbit hole. It's a through the looking glass kind of situation. But this movie handles it really well because it's very patient and it really takes its time, which is weird because it does not feel like a 90-minute film.
Yeah, I think one of the issues for me is that we constantly feel like we're in the first act. Like the first 2 acts all feel like act 1. Like we feel like we're constantly setting up, and then it just kind of jumps to the third one. I will say the original is much more in the style of the traditional slasher. You know, it came out in 92, which means it was filmed in 91. So it's much more in the vein of things like Halloween, not Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. And it's a little bit more simple in that you say his name and he kind of appears and murders you. I will say this mythos is a little inconsistent in all the movies. It's a little inconsistent of exactly what and why the Candyman comes forward. And I think that's also a problem in this movie because it has trouble establishing its rules and then staying by them.
Nin, any thoughts on that? Because yeah, having not seen any of them, I felt like this was a little jumbled. But yeah, it turned out, finding out later, Andy said, yeah, no, there's some of this explained in previous films, other stuff it's inconsistent.
Yeah, so there's actually 3 other Candyman movies, which 2 and 3 go off of the original as sequels, but with the new one, they threw those out because those are pretty bad. So they just started with the original one and then continued the story from there, which is something that's similar to what Halloween did.
Yeah,
with the new
absolutely.
one.
Yeah.
Sorry. Classic.
It's okay. Yeah, I was just trying to figure out where I picked
So,
up.
well,
Go ahead,
one thing that I wanted to mention is, I said there's a lot of ideas competing for space here. One of them is Anthony McCoy himself, Yahya Martina Abdullah II. He's got a long name.
He says a long name.
He's slowly kind of turning it into the Candyman himself, which is a really interesting idea because his he gets stung by this bee and then like his hand starts to kind of rot and like it only gets worse. His whole arm starts getting infected and he's like clearly kind of turning into to Candyman. And that's a great idea, but like I said, it's competing with like 4 other great ideas.
Yeah, it is trying to do a lot in the film. Like I said, it on the one hand, you have a protagonist who's kind of becoming this very thing that he fears, which is interesting in itself. Like Nightmare on Elm Street 2 did that. That was the whole premise, right? You've also got a heaping dose of previous lore that you're trying to work in and build into, which is something like, usually origin films are good at, right? Nightmare 1 or Halloween does that pretty good, right? Like typically horror slashers follow these kind of basic formulas, and this one just tries to do a bunch, and I think that kind of hurts it because it just feels like it's doing too much. I mean, you said it perfectly. And then like the first and second acts feel pretty tight. It feels like this puzzle box is going somewhere. There's a lot of mysteries, and then come Act 3, it's like it all has to come to a screeching head somewhere, and it doesn't really feel satisfying in most of the areas where you were interested. There were a handful of mysteries that I kind of wanted solved. And by the end of the movie, I was like, I guess I got my answers, but I was so much more interested. Like the journey to get there was so much more interesting than the destination for me, because it just felt like this kind of, who said it? We were talking to somebody about this movie. They said, yeah, it feels like there was a half hour that was cut out somewhere. Like it felt like this movie jumped like to conclusions in a weird way. Cause before that, the setup was so interesting.
I'd be interested to see like an extended release or whatever, I guess the director's cut or something like that to see what ended up on the cutting floor. Because it definitely feels like some stuff just kind of got cut out for time's sake and it sacrificed the film for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Characters' motivations are like drastically at least one character in particular I can think of, and I bet you guys know who I'm talking about. Like throughout most of the film, seems to have kind of their own course and kind of doing their own thing. They're a little mysterious, but then at the end, like they come crashing in with like this all new motivation, and suddenly they're like a totally different person. And I was like, man, I really did not see that coming. I don't think anybody did because there wasn't a lot of setup for it. It just happens.
I think if it is, I'm pretty sure it's the same guy we're talking about, but I feel like they kind of tried to explain that, but it was just like they feature some of his, I guess, development at one part, and then there's like another brief one, and then it's just kind of like bang, like
right. And then suddenly out of nowhere, here we are, which, that's okay. Like, there's a few mysteries in this film, and like any good mystery, right, there has to be a solution at the end. Sometimes it's not always going to be satisfying, and that's okay. What is satisfying, I think, is watching these characters kind of develop over time. Yahya Abdul is so much fun to watch in this movie. Like, he's great. He's this kind of tortured artist who's just getting more and more inside his own head. At the beginning of the film, he's very endearing. He's very hopeful. Like, hey, I'm going to come up with something new. And then by about the halfway point, he's off the deep end, and it's like, man, he doesn't know how to get back. He's asking for help for people in his life. Like, it's a struggle. They really run with that idea of art and having a studio and producing things that are meaningful. There's an art critic character who's got a whole thing that she talks about. Like, I think our creators here, DaCosta, is also executive produced by Jordan Peele, and the writer of the original work, I believe, I forget his name, Win Rosenfeld, I think. No, he did not write the original book, or yeah, Clive Barker, I guess, with the original story, right? Yeah,
with the original story.
Yeah, apologies. I keep referencing Nightmare, but it's a little bit of a, even though he didn't also.
No, I liked, so like you referenced Nightmare in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. It's kind of like they see the people getting killed, but they don't see what's killing them. And that's kind of similar to this, where you see the killer in the reflections, but it's not like they don't see him there other than a reflection.
Yeah. I think a lot of the kill stuff is really effective. Andy, I feel like I've been talking forever. You got to have something to jump into there.
Yeah.
Right?
So one big difference, I think, in like I said, the original is is a real traditional slasher, but we also get kind of full-fledged Candyman right from the beginning in that film, kind of just like you would get like Jason or Freddy or Mike Myers. They're like at 100% from the beginning. In this one, we kind of build up to Candyman. It's definitely, I think, more of an introduction of a character. Like this almost feels like an origin story, and it does feel like we will get more films. But the whole thing was like establishing and almost creating the character as opposed to someone who's already established. Because in the first one, Candyman is played by Tony Todd, he's like 6'5". He's got this big booming voice, and he's got this great dialogue, and he's just like, he does a lot of monologuing and just like
be my victim.
Yeah, he's like, be with me, be my victim. I am the writing on the wall, and he's like swinging his hook around. It's it's like Shakespeare, man.
It's very iconic, definitely.
Yeah, and we don't really get any of that in this movie, but we kind of build to it. And like I said, I think this is setting up a franchise, and I think if this gets a second or third movie, I think those will probably be a little bit more focused.
Yeah, I think so. I do want to talk about like the cinematography and the presentation. This movie has some really stunning set design as one of the things I noticed right off the bat. A lot of the sets here are practical. I think they actually went and shot in places, but a lot of the buildings are really odd, really unique architecture, a lot of brutalism, a lot of concrete. And I know that kind of ties in with like the fine art angle of our lead artist character, but it also harkens back to directors like Stanley Kubrick, who traditionally used a ton of brutalist architecture in their work if possible. It reminded me of movies like A Clockwork Orange or even The Shining at certain points, especially with like one point perspective. Additionally, a lot of really creative camera work. The film opens with inverted production slates, which already sets a really cool, unique, creepy tone, along with some really fantastic Philip Glass music that I think came from the original film, and quickly segments into like this upside down look of the city, like this camera kind of slowly trawling across the streets as we look at like cloud covered buildings that are upside down and inverted so they look right side up. Just really unique stuff, and the film is full of this. I mean, even in its origin storytelling with these like shadow puppet kind of effects, like really fantastic visuals, really great. Like I was glued to the screen for the film, even in the stuff that was confusing. Like it's just a beautiful film to watch. Really fantastic work for what otherwise I thought was going to be a slasher horror. The music's also tremendous. What do you guys think?
Well, I was just going to touch on the music. I'm a huge fan of the soundtrack of the original, and the original was by Philip Glass, who has, of course, done a lot of film work. And he has this style of minimalist writing music, and it's not him. He didn't score the new one, but it's inspired a little bit by that. You get some really intense minimalistic. And by the way, minimalism in music usually means repetitive. Like you have repetitive sounding music, repetitive ideas. So we get a few really intense tracks like that, but it's its own thing. It's not just like, a copy paste of Philip Glass, but I really like the score.
Yeah, it's really tremendous. Nin, any thoughts?
Yeah, I really liked the score. And then as far as the cinematography, there's that one shot with that one kill. It's kind of like,
oh yeah,
they come out, and that one was really nice.
Yes. Yeah. Really good stuff. There's another great sequence. I mean, there's a handful of really cool sequences in this, especially involving mirrors. That's a big part of it. Obviously the say my name kind of thing 5 times. But there's a really great sequence in an elevator that's all mirrors, like floor to ceiling, walls are all mirrors. And that stuff's, it's not easy to shoot. Typically you can see the camera in reflection, so it's hard to shoot a room full of mirrors and make it look cool. And like they totally do. Like it's simple, but like it's really effective to like bring you into the world of the film. It really works. I also like the costuming. It's really tremendous. And the color. The Candyman in this film wears this kind of like yellow raincoat. It's like this off yellow color. And at the beginning of the film, you don't see a lot of that. But then as he starts to kind of become more of an entity within the movie, our artist characters, Anthony's kind of looking at him more and painting, you start to see these hints of this yellow. And like, before you know it, like they have, there's a bathroom scene and the wall in the back is painted yellow, or a character is wearing a yellow polo. Like, it's really consistent. Meanwhile, Anthony, our lead, has a red hat that he wears all the time. And as the film goes on and Anthony becomes less of himself and more into this Candyman mythos, you see less of the red. It's crazy. Like, it's really simple stuff, but it's really effective visual storytelling.
Yeah, I agree. I think the visuals of this are really fantastic. There's some really kind of iconic scenes, and it's pretty gruesome. Like some of the there's a lot of body horror. You know, it's not like jump scary, it's just body horror scary.
Yeah, for sure. It's a hard R, definitely. And I guess to wrap this up, because we've been talking about this for a long time, as a new slasher film, I do feel like the mythos around our slasher character is a little confusing in this one for the average person, but overall I feel like I understand most of the motivations behind Candyman. I genuinely don't get exactly how his powers work. That's the one thing I don't actually know. If you say his name 5 times, does he kill you or just other people in the room? Does it always work or just sometimes? Like, the movie's a little inconsistent. You put out a second film, you tie all those knots up, like, problem solved. Like, we're great, right? We're on our way. What do you guys think?
Yeah, no, I agree that I think that's been, and that's a problem in the first film, is the original film also because there's the character, but then a lot of times just horror tropes are thrown in just because, and then they kind of make everything not make sense. I think it does need to kind of establish what its rules are and are not, and just clarify them a little bit more moving forward. Which, like, I'm pretty like, this was also had a good box office opening, so we might get another film.
Yeah, that would be super cool. Nin?
Yeah,
I mean, what do you think?
Same as Andy. It's like in the first one where it's kind of inconsistent, where it's just like, does everybody in the room die? Is it just you? Like, Candyman shows up and you're standing there, but somebody else shows up, so they're also murdered. But yeah, hopefully, I mean, it was set up for a sequel, it seems, but I do hope that they kind of further explain like what exactly it is, because
yeah, absolutely. Like, it's just, that's the one thing for a good slasher to work. It's got to have pretty clear rules, like, typically, right? Like, you know, Freddy Krueger gets you when you're sleeping, doesn't work if you don't believe in him. Jason Voorhees seems to always come back forever. There's really nothing you can do about it. Don't have sex in the cabin in the woods. Michael Myers, I don't know. He's coming for Laurie Strode. Candyman, a little bit more unique, but that's what makes it exciting. That's what makes it new, right? Like, that's what makes it different. Yeah,
it's kind of interesting too, because all of the other slashers, like, they're very iconic. They all like have essentially the same face or mask for most of the movies, or similar, because Jason has multiple masks.
It's true.
But like, you get the gist that it's the same person, and they've set it up to where there's been different Candyman or Candyman. So it's like
kind of across time. Yeah.
Absolutely. I also have a small crackpot cinema theory that most slasher films are classist, and this one technically checks that box, but also leans into racism as horror, which is exciting because it's different. So yeah. Anyway, I'll talk about that some other time. Andy, would you recommend Candyman?
Yeah, absolutely. Both for fans of the original and for people new to the property. It's not perfect. It's got some issues narratively, but I think it has good, like we said, it's got great cinematography, good score, good performances, and it's hopefully kind of the beginning of a franchise or trilogy or something. So I think there's more to come, but I think it's a good jumping in point.
Yeah. Nin, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely recommend Candyman, and I do recommend watching the original one first. So if there's anything you don't understand, maybe you can get a better idea of it. But I do recommend this new one. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I watched it twice, but because some woman answered her phone while we were in the theaters.
Brutal. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
During my second watch, somebody was texting in that one too. So I was just like,
wow,
I don't know what you don't understand about horror movies.
Well, I'm sorry. People who listen to this podcast know my opinions on other people in movie theaters. It's a whole thing. Andy too. We're all on the same page. We're with you 100%. I'm in the same boat. Having not seen the original Candyman film, I can say definitively, like, this movie's cool. You should go see it. I really enjoyed it, especially if you have any passing interest, not only in like horror and slashers, and stuff that's new and exciting in this industry, but also just like good cinematography. Like really, I can't wait to watch this movie again just because I want to enjoy like the shots, like really creative stuff. Really tremendous. That's Candyman in a nutshell. We should move on to our next film. Before then.